Welcome to Talkcast, and today a reaction video. This is the Prime Minister of Australia who spoke earlier today, as I'm saying this, with respect to the Bondi massacres.
There is no place in Australia for anti-Semitism. It is an evil that tears at the fabric of our country. It puts the peaceful, free and equal society that we cherish at risk. Sadly, since the terrible events of October 2023, we have witnessed an increase in anti-Semitism, which is, of course, an ancient hatred.
Yes, and we're going to come back to this. It began within 24 hours of October 7, 2023, when I think it's around 1,200 people were killed by Islamic terrorists, Hamas and other Palestinians who broke into Israel and tried to commit a genocide. They had genocidal intentions. They were wantonly and just randomly killing as many people, Jews, as they possibly could. And they kidnapped some 200 plus more people back into Gaza as well. And in Australia, celebrations happened as soon as the news came in, and then on the steps of the Opera House. And nothing was done about these celebrations. I mean, by that I mean no arrests of the people, the Islamic extremists in Sydney, who were going out onto the streets and celebrating, saying that this was a day they were very proud of and they were excited about.
I'm smiling. I'm smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of happiness. It's a day of pride. It's a day of victory. This is the day we've been waiting for.
And then going to the Opera House and having a large gathering where they were saying, "Gas the Jews," and "Where's the Jews," and various other things. The only person who was arrested that day, within 24 hours, was actually an Israeli, carrying an Israeli flag. He was arrested by the New South Wales police. Very, very little was said by our Prime Minister and by the politicians about that evil response to what had taken place in Israel. And as we have seen, and we're going to come back to this Prime Minister, along with many in his government, have actually rewarded the terrorists. The terrorists wanted, among other things, to gain legitimacy. Hamas wanted to gain legitimacy. The Palestinians, who also, they were civilians, right? Some of the people who entered Israel, who broke down the fences and killed people, they weren't all Hamas. They were not all Hamas. Many were civilians. They were Hamas supporters. And which makes sense because the population of Gaza actually elected Hamas. So it's no surprise that they supported Hamas and accompanied Hamas militants into Israel to kill people. And what this Prime Minister and the Australian federal government did was to recognise the state of Palestine, which is one of the things that Hamas wanted. Of course, they want the destruction of Israel, but they also want to be rewarded, legitimised on the world stage. And this Prime Minister and this government has been unceasing, almost, in its criticism of the way in which Israel has prosecuted the war against Hamas. They've been very weak. They haven't supported Israel. Every time they've said Israel has a right to defend themselves, they've also said they believe in a two-state solution and that Israel should act within international law, implying that a genuine genocide was happening by the Israelis against the Palestinians. And of course, they've criticised Netanyahu personally as well. Let's keep going.
We have seen a series of appalling attacks targeting Australia's Jewish community. That culminated on Sunday in one of the worst acts of mass murder that this country has ever seen. The terrorist atrocity that killed 15 innocent people, including 10-year-old Matilda, who will be buried later today, was an attack on our Jewish community, but it was also an attack on the Australian way of life. Australians are shocked and angry I am angry. It is clear we need to do more to combat this evil scourge, much more.
We're going to come back to this again and again. What is the evil scourge? Precisely. What is the source of the terrorism? Precisely. What is the source of mass murder, as he mentioned there? Precisely. If this was a neo-Nazi attack, we would have no problem whatsoever saying that the National Socialists, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists were responsible. If this was a Christian attack on someone, let's say in America, where sometimes you get abortion centers being shot up by Christian fundamentalists, we have no problem saying that that was caused by Christians. We don't need to say it's not all Christians. Obviously, it's not when that sort of thing happens. We could likewise say, ludicrous as it sounds, not all Nazis were responsible for killing Jews, in a sense. It wasn't all the Nazis actually there at the camps committing the atrocities. Some were just in the background, perhaps pretending they didn't really know what was going on, or perhaps they didn't know what was actually going on. Of course, it's not all Muslims. No one says it is. This idea that we need to say that after every single Islamic atrocity, or Islamist atrocity, if you like, from September 11 onwards, in fact, it's before that, but that's really when it came into my consciousness and many people's consciousness. But there were many Islamist terrorist attacks prior to September 11. Some people feel the deep impulse to have to say things like, but it's not all Muslims, and this isn't religion, it's politics, and those kind of things. It's enough in saying that. We don't need to hear that anymore. Not only is it false, it simply hides the ball. It distracts from being able to identify what the problem is. If you cannot say that some communities have within them extremists who will commit terrorist atrocities in a way that is categorically different to what is happening within other communities, within other religions or other political movements, then you are blind to being able to see the way in which ideas motivate behaviors. And you have to figure out what the ideas are. Why would people want to kill Jews? What is the specific reason? Many kinds of groups happen to hate Jews. This is what David Deutsch calls the pattern, or an aspect of the pattern. Okay? The pattern is about maintaining the legitimacy of hurting Jews. Now, the most severe way in which one might hurt Jews, starting from genocide down to mass murder and just regular murder, is that destruction of life. And there are many kinds of groups that identify Jews as the problem. Nazis, white supremacists, Christians have historically as well. And in the past, as a matter of history, we have been able to identify moments where that has been a serious problem. Even in the Second World War, yes, there were many Christian anti-Semites who kind of supported or allowed what was happening in Germany to happen. But certainly we had no problem saying Germany, in the form of the Nazis, had a severe problem. Why can't we say that Islam, in the form of Islamists, have a problem? There is a problem there. Not all Muslims. But there is something about the ideology that needs to be spoken about clearly. There are parts of the text, I've talked about this in my own The Pattern video. There are passages in the text. Now, are there passages within the Old Testament or the New Testament that might be able to get a Christian there in some way, shape or form? Of course. But it depends upon what interpretation is allowed to flourish at any given time within a community. Christians today, Catholics, for example, any Catholic who would try to stand up and say, my reading of the Bible, the Christian Bible, suggests that Jews are especially evil and they deserve to be murdered, would be called out by the broader Catholic community and the broader Christian community now. They may not have been during the Middle Ages, of course, we know that. That's a matter of history. As a matter of history, we can talk about all sorts of evils that have been perpetuated against the Jews. But let's talk about right now, in the year 2025 and 24 and 23, all the way back to 2001. Where is most of the Jew hatred coming from in terms of numbers of people who subscribe to the most vicious kinds of anti-Semitism? All communities have a kind of anti-Semitism within them. But where is the most vicious and the most dangerous, the most pressing concern when it comes to persecution of Jews? There's only one place. The most broad way in which to talk about it is within Islam. And then you can be a little bit more precise than that. But at least that's a little more precise than saying it's not religion or it's politics. To say that it is coming from Islam is more precise. So we can go further. And you can say extreme Islam, extreme versions of Islam. Islamism, it's often called. Highly conservative Islam, let's say. And I keep saying I'll come back to things, but I will come back to what Sam Harris has talked about after September 11, those decades ago, talking about concentric circles of concern, at the centre of which is something like the most extreme murderous form of jihadism, where they will want to commit terrorism and want to wipe all Jews off the face of the planet. And then outside of that, you have the people who merely support jihad but might not actually commit the atrocities themselves. And then outside of that, you have conservative Muslims who will turn a blind eye. Maybe they're not supportive of it, but they're not exactly going to condemn it either, for fear that they might be attacked by their neighbours, so they'll remain complicit, silent. The kind of people who might, for example, wear full-body burqas or be married to people who are forced to wear full-body burqas and prevent their daughters from learning to read, that kind of thing. Perhaps many of those Muslims will not commit genocide or try to commit genocide, or say even that they support genocide, but they won't exactly be vocal in condemning it. And then beyond that, you have, let's say, more liberal Muslims who may condemn it, and then secular Muslims. Not many of those, because of course a secular Muslim means that you've kind of apostated out. You've rejected the so-called revealed truth in the Quran. Ideas about Muhammad flying off to heaven in a winged horse. So there are these concentric circles of Islam, different ways to interpret passages within the doctrine, different cultures within the culture, within the religion of Islam. But we can say that that certain forms of anti-Semitism, vicious anti-Semitism, murderous, genocidal anti-Semitism is coming from Islam. And it's important to say that, because then as a government, as police force, and even as regular citizens, you know what to be concerned about. You're not looking in the synagogues. You're not looking in the churches. You're not looking at the local Anglican parish. You may very well, however, be looking at the mosques, in particular mosques. And so this is why we need to actually use particular language, because if you're just going to talk about generic extremism, you're going to miss the mark. Keep going.
As Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Gillian Siegel has delivered a report that sets out further steps we can take. The Australian Government adopts and fully supports the plan to combat anti-Semitism. We have already legislated for hate speech, hate crimes, hate symbols, outlawing doxing. We've already undertaken education action, including appointing the first ever student ombudsman and the development of the Envoy's report card on universities.
Look how much we've done. Look how much we've censored and banned so far. But still, we're talking about extremism and we're talking about symbols. I think he actually eventually mentions the swastika. Like that is the problem right now. Not to say it's not a problem. And also, we had a gathering recently outside of the New South Wales Parliament of literal neo-Nazi white supremacists who were saying terrible things about Jews and holding up posters and that kind of thing. And there was absolutely no backward step when the politicians from the federal government, through to the state government, the police, media commentators, influencers, all the intelligentsia came out and said, these neo-Nazis are evil. And in fact, one of the leaders even got sent back to where they came from, namely South Africa. We had no problem with that. We had no problem identifying the problem and arresting some of the perpetrators and deporting some. That was neo-Nazis. That was only a month ago, by the way. What do you think will happen? Now, it's not to say that all Muslims again, but what do you think will happen to what he's going to refer to as hate preachers within Islam? Are we going to see deportations? And if we are, why didn't it happen sooner? It hasn't happened yet. They've captured the two people that actually, well, they killed one of them and they arrested the other. But it didn't happen in a vacuum, did it? And this kind of thing doesn't happen in a vacuum. They were radicalized. How? We'll soon find out. But even if their radicalization isn't directly connected to some existing mosque, let's say, other people are. And those mosques don't exist in a vacuum either. They exist in communities where that kind of thing is tolerated. And those communities don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within cities, suburbs, states, and nations where that kind of thing is tolerated. What kind of thing? Preaching hate against, for example, Israel unceasingly and Jews unceasingly, creating an environment which is the fertile ground for people who want to go out and commit anti-Semitic acts on a continuum from let's deface, which has happened, let's deface the local park by writing anti-Semitic slogans about Jews and Israelis and Netanyahu, let's say, through to firebombing childcare centres and schools, which has happened here in Sydney, all around in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, by the way, which is where Bondi happens to be. Bondi Beach is in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and there are many suburbs around there that they have large populations of Jewish people. And those large populations of Jewish people over the last 2 years have had to experience populations of Muslim people who come from the western suburbs of Sydney driving convoys into parts of eastern Sydney, just driving around and terrorising people. Maybe not directly committing body-to-body violence, but, throwing bricks, writing graffiti, yelling at people, that kind of thing, terrorising people. So all of that is on a continuum with let's pick up a gun and start shooting people. It's not different in kind. Okay, well, the loss of life is kind of different to an assault, but it's a matter of the application of force against people, coercion against people of the most vicious possible kind. But it's all a continuum of force and the breaking of laws. Let's keep going.
We'll continue to work through the implementation of the 13 recommendations in consultation with the Jewish community and the envoy. And of course, the first recommendation was the adoption of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism that...
Oh, wonderful. We're adopting the definition of anti-Semitism, and we will continue to work through these strategies that the envoy for anti-Semitism has said should be implemented. We're just going to slow. There's no urgency here. There hasn't apparently been much urgency ever since this envoy was appointed some time ago. When is it urgent? When should it be? Could we not get the government together and have a meeting now and spend 6, 12 hours, whatever it takes, to implement exactly what needs to be implemented? The executive government can do that.
The government adopted. Today I'm announcing a significant number of additional actions to build on the plan. Firstly, the Attorney-General and Minister for Home Affairs will develop a package of legislative reforms to crack down on those who spread hate, division and radicalisation. The National Security Committee has agreed that changes will include the following 5 points. Agreed changes will include: 1. Aggravated hate speech offence for preachers and leaders who promote violence.
Aggravated hate speech legislation against hate preachers. Hate preachers. What hate preachers are we concerned about? Are we concerned about the local evangelical church preaching hate against, I don't know, what might they define hate as? Sex outside of wedlock? Homosexuals? Or merely saying that certain things are sinful? Is that hate? And can that evangelical leader be arrested? Because lots of things that aren't generally regarded as being woke are within, the Christian doctrine, indeed the Jewish doctrine. Is the local rabbi going to be arrested for saying something like, you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage, and marriage should only exist between a man and a woman, something like that? Could that be regarded as hate speech or a hate preacher? We don't know. And the problem is that if you don't say specifically hatred against Jews or something like Islamic hate preachers who promote terrorism, let's say, then you're missing the mark. You're lacking precision. You're directing resources into places where it's not needed, where the problem isn't to be found. It's that whole thing, and again, Sam Harris has spoken very eloquently about this, a similar issue here, where years ago there was, well, it still is a concern, but years ago there was this concern about, well, in fact, it began when, after September 11, the TSA was created in the United States. And in fact, security around the world at airports was severely increased. And there was this great concern then about so-called racial profiling. Now, racial profiling's been an issue, so to speak, in places like the United States, where certain communities disproportionately commit crimes. And so police, quite rightly, profile those people. And it's a form of discrimination because we all do it. Any girl walking in the street at night should be more concerned. They should profile based on gender, let's say, be more concerned about the young male walking towards them than the older female, let's say. That's a form of profiling, and that's reasonable to do. Now, if the young girl walking alone at night should rightly be more concerned about the young man walking towards her down a dark alley as compared to the elderly woman, then it is quite right also for police, using actual statistics on crime, to racially profile. And so to airports, for example. Should it be the case that we are more or less concerned, again, about the old white lady or the young Afghani man? Do we profile based on race and gender and age? Of course we do. We profile. In the same way, if the Australian government here just talks generically about the way in which they're going to deal with this issue as a form of a concern about extremism, we're not doing any kind of profiling when we should, because that way we use the resources most efficiently and effectively. We don't have infinite resources, so we can't go sending out, let's say, for example, undercover police to every single religious place of worship. There's no point. There's no point sending a person disguised, let's say, as a Jew to the local synagogue or to the local church. But there may very well be a very good reason why we should disproportionately focus on certain mosques in Western Sydney. We don't need to focus on the Buddhist temples or the Sikhs. The preachers there aren't spewing out the kind of hate that is leading to a hatred, a visceral hatred of Jews in Israel. So what the Prime Minister is doing here is trying to be even-handed. And in being even-handed, he's being exceedingly unfair to every other community and every other religion and every other citizen of Australia when they and the people in their community have nothing to do with this. Now, is it unfair to the rest of the Islamic community, who are completely innocent of this, to be tarred with the same brush? They're not being tarred with the same brush, is the point. They're not. Except for ridiculous racists, of which there are some, who might very well say we should deport all Muslims or something ridiculous like that. We can ignore those. They're a fraction of a percent of the Australian population. Do we need to worry about them? Yeah, sure. But we need to worry more about Islamic extremism, Because although mass murder and attempts at genocide are the worst form, there's all sorts of other forms as well leading up to that. Regular murder, regular assault, rape, throwing bricks through windows, firebombing, defacing. And if that is coming from sections of one particular community, then unfortunately for the wider community, they're going to be affected by that. This is not racism. This is not a terrible form of bigotry. It is discrimination. We need to discriminate. We need to discriminate between communities where there isn't a form of murderous anti-Jew extremism and communities where there are. And then discriminate within those communities the extremists from the moderates, discriminate between the dangerous people and the not dangerous people. We can do that. And the Muslim community should be supportive of this. They should be very supportive of this. Surely they should want to eviscerate the extremists from their own midst. And if they don't, they're part of the problem. And if they get upset and offended by the fact that the police and authorities are focusing on them more, then they shouldn't be. And also they can be ignored insofar as they get offended. Hurt feelings in this regard are not the major concern here. If we need to hurt some feelings in order to prevent mass murder, so be it. So be it. Let's keep going.
Secondly, increase penalties for hate speech promoting violence. Thirdly, making hate an aggravating factor in sentencing crimes for online threats and harassment. Fourthly, developing a regime for listing organisations whose leaders engage in hate speech promoting violence or racial hatred. And fifthly, developing a narrow federal offence for serious vilification based on race and/or advocating racial supremacy.
We do not have free speech of the kind that exists in the United States here in Australia at all. We don't have a First Amendment. We do have something called Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, which places quite strict prohibitions on certain kinds of speech. And it has been used effectively over the years. By effectively, I mean when politicians and courts and other individuals want to use it, often as a cudgel, to punish people whose speech they just don't like, even if it's not stirring up hatred. But certainly stirring up hatred and stirring up violence is well within the remit of this legislation to already deal with. The legislation is concerned about, for example, intimidation. Fair enough. Okay, maybe intimidation should not be allowed using speech. It may very well be the precursor to calling for violence. But within 18C, mere offensive words, which can of course be interpreted extremely broadly and have been by the courts, and there have been prosecutions made against people who didn't really do anything wrong. Well, by wrong I mean morally wrong. They may well have been in breach of the law according to certain judges' interpretations of it. But this legislation already exists. Now, I'm no lawyer. Section 18C is a civil matter, so you can sue someone, but it's not criminal. But it doesn't need to be criminal because there are already laws there. And the problem with 18C, what people complain about with 18C in Australia, is that there is this word offend. So if you say something that is likely to offend someone else, then a civil case can be brought against you. You can be sued because someone is offended by your words. And as I say, it's already been used. And so this is the problem. And this is why we say we don't have free speech here in Australia of anything like what exists in the United States. But within, and I'm just reading this because, as I say, not a lawyer, the Criminal Code Act 1995 already makes it illegal to use the phone, SMS, internet or whatever, social media, to make threats, which includes threats to hurt someone, threats to kill someone, that kind of thing. And there are laws there also about incitement or encouraging violence. If you encourage others to harm or kill someone or glorify or advocate violence in any way that is likely to lead to harm. Where I could see this might be tightened up is again to have something about threatening to kill specific groups, but that might already be covered. So, point is here, he's still not speaking clearly about the exact issue right now.
The Minister for Home Affairs will also have new powers to cancel or reject visas for those who spread hate and division in this country or would do so if they were allowed to come here. David Gonski has agreed to lead a 12-month task force which will include the envoy to ensure the Australian education system prevents, tackles and properly responds to anti-Semitism.
Well, how on earth is that going to work? How? So we're going to have the education system teach lessons about anti-Semitism. We already have history lessons for every person in Australia who goes through the schooling system here, compulsory to go to school here. They learn about the Holocaust. They're not coming out the end of that, apparently, very well versed in anti-Semitism and anti-Jew hate. They're coming out of the education system, apparently, with their sympathies laying more with people like Hamas and the Palestinians as compared to Jews and Israelis. So it's already failing. Now, why would it fail? Why would the education system already fail when there is history there being taught, which is going to be more robust than any generic course on anti-Semitism, I would suggest? It fails because, number one, the curriculum is poorly written. And so history is taught through the lens of colonialism and how, white people are basically evil and the brown people and the black people and the Indigenous people are all good by virtue of their skin colour, among other things. So you've got that, you've got poor curriculum, but then you also have poorly educated teachers and just the teachers themselves who have a political bent. So even if you have a good curriculum, which in some cases you do for certain subjects, you get poor teaching. The teachers don't know what they're doing, don't know what they're talking about, lack the knowledge, and anyway have certain bigotry towards people like Jews. So if they were made to deliver content about anti-Semitism, they would deliver it in such a way that I imagine a student would very well come out of such a lesson even more anti-Semitic than they ever went into it. Because a teacher could quite easily turn such a lesson into reasons why anti-Semitism exists, legitimate reasons why they say anti-Semitism exists. And by the way, all the awful ways in which Islamophobia rears its head. So that would be what schools would teach, and that would certainly be what universities would teach. These institutions, these educational institutions cannot be trusted to deliver such lessons. They can't be trusted to deliver the existing lessons effectively or well. Who's going to write such an anti-Semitism curriculum and who's going to deliver it? And in what style are they going to deliver it? Let's keep going.
The East Safety Commissioner, the Special Envoy and the Department of Communications will work together to provide online safety advice to address anti-Semitism. This builds on the extension in my EFO as well, all of these measures, of funding to provide overall security support to the Jewish community, including at places of worship. I can also announce today the disaster recovery funding arrangements will be triggered in response to the attack.
So the federal government already has in place, apparently, funding for security services for the Jewish people. Where were they at Bondi Beach? Where have they been? From what I understand, I could be wrong, what I understand, although there were private security there at Bondi Beach, they were not armed. They were not allowed to be armed. They were not issued the permits or licenses or whatever was required. And there were only 3 police there. I think many people know this now. 3 at most. It may very well have been only 2. So the private security hired by the people running the event, which celebrated the first day of Hanukkah there at Bondi Beach, those private security were not permitted to have guns. But ironically, the shooters, one of them at least, was allowed to have a gun. And he wasn't even an Australian citizen. He was a resident, but he wasn't an Australian citizen. It's very difficult to get a gun here in Australia. But this non-citizen who had been to a Philippines jihadi training camp was allowed to have a gun. But many guns, 6 guns apparently. So we have these ridiculously strict gun laws here in Australia, which I think Americans rightly complain about, and many Australians do as well. The suggestion is we're going to make them more strict still. So we're going to punish everyone else because there are certain people who commit mass murder against Jews coming from a particular ideology. It might have been quite useful, in fact, if some people there at Bondi Beach had have possessed guns, mightn't it? But the people on the left don't seem to appreciate this. If you make something illegal, it doesn't prevent the criminals from still getting access to it. What it does, however, is tips the balance in favour of the criminals against the innocent people who no longer have a means of protecting themselves. So one of the prescriptions here from the Prime Minister and the government is to make already draconian gun laws more draconian so that people who are law-abiding, who will obey the law, will find it even more difficult to protect themselves. It's basically impossible now for the average person to get a gun. You're not allowed to have a gun just sitting in your home unless you're a farmer. You're not allowed to carry it around with you. This is not like the United States. But criminals will. It's not that criminals are allowed to. Criminals, of course, will. Criminals will break the law. There's very little weapons you can have as an Australian, by the way. Not allowed to carry knives. I don't think you're allowed to have pepper spray. You can't carry a baton.
So the Commonwealth and New South Wales will share the financial burden of the recovery. This is the first time that the DRFA has been used for a terrorist attack. This will provide support to victims, their families and small business impacted in the wake of the Bondi Beach terror attack. Over the coming days, I'll have more to say about the government's response to Sunday's atrocity, including on gun control, and I note that New South Wales is moving on that next week. Every Jewish Australian has the right to be proud of who they are and what they believe. And every Jewish Australian has the right to feel safe, valued and respected for the contribution that they make to our great nation.
He says every Jewish person in Australia has the right to feel proud of who they are, where they came from, whatever, all that sort of stuff. He's done nothing, again, since October 7, 2023, but make Jewish people feel ashamed of being Jewish or being associated with Israel. He's made them feel the opposite to proud. He's made them feel ashamed by consistently siding with the Gazans, the Palestinians, and against Israel. He's criticised Israel over and again, as has the rest of his government. He's been unable to stand up for an ally, a beacon of the Enlightenment and of the West, and instead engage in the politics of victimhood and identity. He makes Jews feel ashamed, not proud. They may very well have the right to feel proud, but he's doing nothing whatever, to allow them to feel anything but shame in the face of the actions of the government and his words and the words of the foreign minister in particular.
The terrorists, inspired by ISIS at Bondi Beach, sought to turn Australian against each other.
Terrorists inspired by ISIS. This is the closest he comes to naming the actual problem. The actual problem is Islamist terrorism or Islamic terrorism. It's terrorism that comes from Islam. Now, unless you already know what ISIS is, if you're a child watching this, let's say you're a young teenager, and you're just coming into consciousness about politics and the world and what's going on in the news and that kind of thing, and you hear that. You just hear ISIS. Now, you don't know what ISIS is, maybe. Maybe some people just don't know what ISIS is. Why doesn't he say what ISIS is? It is the Islamic State. That would be far better, far clearer, far more accurate, far more precise, far more helpful than just saying ISIS, because ISIS is not the only Islamic terror group. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the list is long. Jihadis in general. Jihadism as a movement, as a global movement, is a movement of terrorism. It's not an inner struggle. It is the attempt to kill people if they fail to convert to Islam, or to punish places like the United States, and in particular Israel. You could say jihadi terror. There's all sorts of things he could say here, but he says ISIS. And it's like all of the politicians on the left here in Australia and all of the media, they repeat the same things. It's as if an email goes out. They all get a memo or something. If I was in a conspiratorial frame of mind, I would think that they actually do. Because this is the refrain. They keep on saying ISIS. And I think they say it probably because our pathetic, our hopeless, our weak intelligence and security agencies use this kind of terminology. They're exactly the same security agencies and intelligence agencies that have said over and over again that the main concern here in Australia, as it is in America apparently, is white nationalist terrorism. That's what we're really concerned about, white nationalist terrorists. How they come to these conclusions, I don't know. But what I do know is that people who tend to go into the government tend to be quite woke. They tend to be quite left. I'm sure some aren't. Some are quite heroic and want to do the right thing. But many are there to advance their careers, and they know what they have to say in order to advance their careers through the bureaucracy, even if the part of the bureaucracy that they're involved with are things like police and the military and the security agencies, where you would expect more conservative or right-leaning or, tough guys who don't care about what people say would be located, would be found. But not always. We find that just as in the UK, where it's a real problem now, the leadership of places like the police, where the tough guys are, where the heroes are supposed to be very woke, very politically correct. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend anyone. And why would they want to risk offending anyone when, of course, they could get sued because of legislation that exists on the books about whether if you say the wrong thing and it offends someone, you could be taken to court.
Australians have responded to that act of hatred with love and sympathy for those in mourning. Australians responded to that act of cowardice and violence with bravery and with kindness.
True, but you might very well want to say at this point also, not all Australians. I've seen a vast amount of hate online about this. And we've heard about people already celebrating this kind of thing, disgusting as that is. So it's not all Australians that have sympathies for the Jews. I'm sure some are giving the thumbs up. And if you're willing to say that it's not all Muslims that commit this atrocity, it's not all Australians who are supportive of the Jews at this particular time either. There's rather a large fraction that think it was warranted or who celebrate it. We know that because we've seen it on October the 8th. We saw it within 24 hours after the atrocity, the attempt at genocide that happened in Israel. And that was a far worse event than this in terms of numbers and ongoing suffering and so forth. So I wouldn't be too proud as the Prime Minister of Australia in saying that Australians, are with the Jewish community. Some are, hopefully a majority.
And we saw it coming together last night at St Mary's Cathedral of interfaith communities that was really uplifting. It is now up to all of us to honour the courage of those Australians, the heroes of Bondi, in the most meaningful way possible by eliminating the evil of anti-Semitism from our society.
Yes. And eliminating Islamic hatred against Jews, or eliminating Islamist hate preachers. We can talk about it in the same way that we would say we want to eliminate or remove from society, however we want to put it, white supremacy, neo-Nazis. And it's not just extremism of any kind, We don't need to eliminate extremism of all kinds. As I have observed before, If you are an extremist when it comes to peace, you're not a problem. If you're an extremist when it comes to rationality, you're not a problem. You might be, but not in the same way that the extremist Islamist is, the extremist jihadi is.
I'll ask the Envoy to make some comments and then Commissioner Barrett.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Obviously, we gather to consider this mine report and the implementation of it, adoption and implementation of it, in the shadow of the Bondi Massacre.
I don't think she's entirely happy with the Prime Minister. She was appointed by the Prime Minister after October 7. I can't remember when. But the interesting thing was, unsurprising, when she was appointed as this envoy for anti-Semitism, of course, on exactly the same day, at the same time, he appointed an envoy for Islamophobia. Of course he did. I don't know how much work the envoy for Islamophobia had to do, but certainly this person has had quite a bit to do and has written a report and submitted the recommendations. And I think only a small portion of these recommendations have been implemented. And now suddenly there's urgency to implement them. And I think she's talked about this in previous interviews. So I don't think she's all that happy. I don't think it's very happy families up there at the moment.
Which has been an unbelievable tragedy for the community. I have been overwhelmed by support from members of the community, both here and from overseas and from all other envoys around the world. So we stand, I think, at a very important moment, not only for our community, but for fighting anti-Semitism around the world. This more formal response has been a long time coming, but of course it does build on a range of activities and work that started as soon as the report was delivered.
So she bells the cat there. It's been a long time coming. Action has been a long time coming. Some has been implemented, but it's been a long time coming. So that's a rap over the knuckles for the government, specifically for the Prime Minister Albanese there, which I'm sure what she said there wasn't quite approved. However, quite right. Long time coming. I mean, the fact that they have to wait for something like this, and even now, everything basically that's said here, aside from the security stuff, it seems to me to be almost beside the point. What you want is an extremely strong security presence at anything where Jews are gathered in large numbers and in their communities at the moment. There's a pogrom going on worldwide. David Deutsch talks about how it's getting worse. It has been getting worse ever since October the 7th, 2023. So what the Australian government should do is have police devoted to those communities, large numbers, patrolling, proactively, in preparation for expecting there will be some form of terrorism happening. It may not happen, but we need to expect it. We need to be prepared for it. And they weren't this time around. Why? Who knows why? That is the most important thing they can do right now. Have a show of force to protect the Jewish community. Secondarily, go into the Islamic communities. High police presence, undercover presence, listening out for what is being said. And when things are said that are anti-Semitic, and especially calls for terror, those people identified, arrested, charged, prosecuted, perhaps deported as required. Again, this is why you need to say it's coming from a particular religion, Islam, so that you know where to put the resources. It's quite right that you should accept the fact that we live in a world right now where this is going on, where there is a pogrom going on, there is persecution of Jews, there is an attempt to commit a genocide. These two people at Bondi aren't the only two wandering around Australia with these thoughts in their head. They've acted on them. Will they inspire others? Maybe. You might very well say there are other factors at play. Mental illness, incel culture, young men who've lost all hope, Well, the young men who have lost all hope for whatever reason, maybe there's difficulty in finding a job, difficulty in finding a girlfriend, general levels of depression. Okay, all of that we can accept as true. All of that, that kind of person, marinating in this kind of depression and anger and being on their own, which this young man was, and listening to his father, that will find fertile ground within certain interpretations of Islam. You can do something about it. You can make your life meaningful. Your pathetic life, where you have no partner, few friends, no jobs, little prospect. Well, hey, let's make your life worthwhile, because if you go and kill a whole bunch of Jews and then get killed yourself, off to heaven with you. If you're given that message, well, there's something to do. Of course, there's a lot of other things that these young people and the older men might have been told. They might have been, the government has a role to play here. Number one, in protecting the community from people who are going to just lose it in this way anyway, but also in preventing the people from ever being able to commit the atrocity, because they hear what they're saying, what they're discussing among themselves. If you need to put listening devices into, let's say, mosques and some people's homes, then maybe you do it. The intelligence services should have that power. You know, just go to a judge and say, we've got it's clear and imminent threat from this particular house for this particular reason. We've already heard them saying certain things. We're going to monitor them.
It is an important next step. There are a number of urgent initiatives that the Prime Minister has announced relating, of course, to law reform and visa and immigration work. I'm encouraged by some of the medium-term actions that will take place over this next year relating to education. I think they are incredibly important. We have to lay foundations for the future of the nation.
I'm not. I don't think over the next year, educating people, whatever that means, you're pathetic. Not her, but the government's general pathetic attempt to combat anti-Semitism in the education system, when on the weekends, the same people that would act upon anti-Semitic impulses and commit mass murder are going to be getting from the pulpit of the mosque all sorts of anti-Jew hate, and they've got to weigh up, are you going to listen to the teacher or the lecturer or the advertisement, the public service announcement that appears on government broadcasters and on free-to-air television? Are you going to listen to that, or are you going to listen to your imam and every other imam that gets up at the pulpit and lots of other people who are telling you it's okay to kill Jews? Israel is an evil country. They're committing a genocide. You've got to stand up for your people, the other Muslims who are being persecuted. I have no confidence, for want of another word, no confidence in the government's ability to re-educate people. I'm not even sure it's their responsibility. But you can prevent people from saying certain things, engaging in certain activities. That the government can do that. Not just blanket censorship, targeted censorship, targeted at specific communities. We've managed to do it before on just about every other community except the Muslim community.
And there will be ongoing work across all the sectors in the report, longer term, and my office will be engaged in many of them. For example, the work that will take place in relation to online hate. That is an issue all over the world, and we will need to consult more broadly. We have done a lot of work already in that space, but there is a lot to do to bring it to some conclusion.
Basically pointless. Okay, so I think it's an important role that security services can play in monitoring online hate. But if you're just censoring, again, blanket hate, it's up to people to define what hate is. And this is the problem with this. If they're not going to say it's, certain kinds of jihadist Islamist doctrines that we don't want espoused, because that's the problem coming out of this, or white supremacist or whatever, then you just broaden the hate out to be any old thing, and people start using the legislation that prohibits hate to prevent things like, for example, criticism of, I don't know, leftism, criticism of the woke, criticism of the trans movement, criticism of environmentalism, could all be cast as hate.
But I'm looking forward, and I expect the full cooperation of the government, as the Prime Minister has announced, with this ongoing implementation. And it was always envisaged, as you know, the report is quite a high-level report. It was always envisaged that there would be more detailed implementation plans. And so I'm very grateful for the support that we will have ongoing to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Barrett?
Okay, so the next person we're going to hear from is the Federal Police Commissioner. In a sense, the nation's highest ranking police officer, although she has a different jurisdiction and in some sense less power than what the state police commissioner has, Mal Lanyard, who has basically been taking charge of the investigations and the arrests and so on and so forth. There is something to notice, unfortunately, I would say, about the demeanour, the general demeanour of this police officer. I did watch this earlier today. I think there are certain things that you want from a police, commissioner, chief, top brass of the police. In the same way, you want certain things from the top of your military as well. I'm not sure it's this. So let me explain by playing what she has to say.
Good morning. This morning I'll provide a brief update on Operation ARCS and then provide some broader commentary. Yesterday, a Bonnyrigg man was charged with allegedly committing a terrorist attack at Bondi Beach, where 15 people were lethally shot and 49 were injured on December 14, 2025. He has been charged with 59 offences, including 1 count of commit terrorist act, 15 counts of murder, 40 counts of cause wounding, grievous bodily harm to person with intent to murder. In the coming days, the New South Wales Joint Counter-Terrorism Team will execute further search warrants to support our investigation. There is a lot of material to be examined, and the AFP continues to work with both domestic and international partners to build a more complete picture of the movements and who the alleged offenders had contact with, both in Australia and offshore. I can also reveal the AFP has ongoing investigations into people who have been described as hate preachers.
Again, we're getting this hate preacher thing. I guess it's just standard nomenclature. The nomenclature needs to be more precise, as I keep on saying. If we just generically speak about hate preachers, then we can generically speak about terrorism, we generically speak about extremism, and no one really knows what they're looking for. Okay, so the police know. But it's important the community knows. The community understands more broadly where the danger is coming from. It's almost as if to say, if there are lifeguards and lifesavers out at Bondi Beach. Now, if the government was to come out and say, be very careful when going to the beach, and that was it, that doesn't really help. Do they mean on the sand? Do they mean in the water? If they do mean in the water, what do they mean? Well, to be precise, we want to be careful about swimming outside where the flags are. There are flags at the beach and you're supposed to swim between the flags. Swimming out too far, getting caught in a rip. This is precise language about what one needs to be concerned about. Don't swim beyond your capabilities. Don't swim out beyond the breakers if you don't know how to swim. If you don't know how to swim, perhaps don't go in the water at all. Just saying, beware of the beach, the beach is dangerous, doesn't really help. You need to be more precise than that. You need to be more precise than hate preachers. And I think the hate preachers genuinely are only coming from one religion, an extremist part of the religion, but it's not like it's uncommon. Although it's extremist, it doesn't mean it's uncommon. Is it a majority of mosques? Is it 50%? I actually don't know. But I know it's enough to spread the kind of vile messaging that means you have some hundreds of people protesting under Islamist flags in places like Sydney and Melbourne.
These individuals who spew hatred and cause fear are on my radar, and I have had the Counter-Terrorism and Special Investigations Command reviewing information and other material in relation to these individuals since I became the Commissioner. I would now like to make some broader comments. I've just returned from Sydney, where the weight of grief hangs heavy because hatred and violence struck a peaceful and loving Jewish community. Every day we see the beautiful and joyful faces now lost, and in them we see our own loved ones. Today is the funeral of little Matilda. She was so young, she was so innocent, and my heart is so heavy for her family.
Look, so far, so good. I mean, these last few remarks, marginal. I don't know if it's the police commissioner's role to be comforter in chief necessarily. I want, decisive, strong, or authority, forceful talk. She goes on.
I offer my sincere and heartfelt condolences to the families who are mourning and who continue to bury loved ones. One funeral is one too many, but the reality of this cruel attack is that some families will attend more than one. I want to reiterate this today. As AFP Commissioner, I say to Jewish Australians, you do not share this grief alone. I will share the weight of this unfortunate grief with you, not just as a police officer who is dedicated to protecting and serving our country, but also as a wife, as a mother, a sister and a daughter.
As a wife, a mother, a sister, and a daughter. What is this? What is this obsession with identity that she's bringing out now? Why? There's absolutely no need for this. This softly approach. Yes, we need it. We all need compassion for the Jewish community. The Prime Minister has expressed that. Others will express that. In the military, there exists a chaplain for a reason. I think police officers have chaplains to serve that role, to be compassionate. Why? Why do they need that sort of thing? Well, there's a lot of terrible things that go on, but also you need a certain soft hand there in the military and the police, precisely because the rest of the police is supposed to be the hard, sharp edge of the authority of the government. That's what you want from police and military. You don't want someone soft talking about how their wives and mothers and daughters and etc. Who cares? Utterly irrelevant. But this speaks to the deep way in which identity politics is embedded within the Australian government and bureaucracy, as it is in many Western nations. I think it's being pulled out of the United States, but this serves no purpose whatsoever. And unfortunately, but still, unfortunately, there'll be large sections of that extremist parts of the communities we've been talking about, the Islamic community, who will see that as weakness, who will see the fact that, let's face it, okay, this is not a reason not to have a female police commissioner. Of course, we can have a female police commissioner, who cares? But highlighting how she's a wife and a mother and a daughter and all that thing, I think that would be a demonstration of a kind of weakness in their eyes. We don't want weakness right now. We want strength. The other people have the function of serving as compassionate. It's a minor point, but I think that it's a weird impulse that the police commissioner has in wanting to promote her identitarian credentials.
The AFP is resolutely determined to protect Australians. We will be visible and we will use all of our resources and capabilities to identify and target those who want to do us harm. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Burke?
She didn't say much, but she did use up some time, short though it was, again, to highlight what her identity is, whatever the relevance of that is, wife, mother, daughter. But she couldn't spare even 3 seconds to say Islamic terrorism, Muslim extremists, Islamism, jihadism. And the community should be concerned about this, but we're doing everything we can to clamp down on it. And we are infiltrating those communities to try and find out and identify people who may be inspired to do this. And we are going to protect Jewish communities by having patrols. But I think the messaging comes from the government, obviously.